You say your son is dead because of me, that if he hadn't stolen my bike he'd still be alive, and as much as it hurts to hear those words, I won't carry that
10,000!
That motorcycle is in violation of our rules. I want it gone immediately. Look at this. That motorcycle is a danger to our families. We cannot allow it. We must protect our community.
Blame, because I know exactly where my hands were and what they never did, and this story didn't begin with anger or revenge, it began with coincidence, with boredom, with me standing under flickering lights at a weekend auction when a Harley rolled onto the floor, chrome shining like it already knew it was about to change lives. I didn't need it, didn't plan on buying it, yet I raised my paddle anyway, and when I rode it back into the neighborhood the air felt different, curtains moved, people stared, mouths hung open as if I'd dragged something dangerous into a quiet street, even though the engine was calm and controlled, not the monster they imagined. Billy was the first crack in that calm, appearing behind me with forced congratulations and eyes that never stopped measuring what he couldn't have, admitting he'd been at the auction, saying the Harley was his dream, that he'd been saving for it, planning for it, picturing himself on it, and the way he said it made it clear he wasn't sharing a story but staking a claim, like my winning bid was a personal insult rather than simple timing. And when he circled the bike his fingers hovered too close, asking questions that weren't really questions, how fast it was, what I paid, whether I even rode much, each one carrying the same unspoken message that I didn't deserve it, that he did, and I answered politely because at that moment he was just a disappointed kid, not a warning, not a future headline, but when he finally walked away the look he threw back wasn't sadness, it was calculation, the kind that sits quietly and waits. And 3 days later Karen followed, descending from her porch with a clipboard and a smile that never reached her eyes, announcing my name like it offended her mouth and pointing at the Harley as if it were leaking poison into the neighborhood, listing violations she knew by heart but couldn't show on paper, talking about harmony and aesthetics and noise as if she were protecting something sacred, while Billy hovered across the street pretending not to watch, and that's when everything aligned, the auction, the stairs, the sudden rules resurrected. From nowhere, and when I asked for documentation she dismissed me with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged, saying presidents didn't need to explain themselves, promising fines and hearings and consequences with a strange enjoyment in her voice, and from that moment the pressure never stopped, undated warnings on my door, anonymous complaints accusing me of revving the engine at dawn when I was out of town, a loosened bike cover left open to soak the seat in rain, each act small enough to deny but frequent enough to exhaust, and every time I confronted her she denied responsibility while hinting she could make it all go away if I cooperated, and cooperate always meant the same thing, sell the bike, preferably cheap, preferably to her son, and when I refused she escalated, hosting HOA meetings about dangerous machines, using my Harley as a symbol of recklessness while neighbors nodded along in silence, afraid to be next, and Billy tried again with fake friendliness, offering to buy it, joking that accidents happen when bikes sit unused, smiling in a way that never touched his eyes, and that's when I started documenting everything, quietly, patiently, photos and dates and recordings, and when Karen noticed the camera her tactics shifted from intimidation to paperwork, certified letters and legal threats meant to wear me down, not realizing that every move she made was tightening something she couldn't see, a net built from her own words and actions, waiting for the moment when weight would finally drop and there would be no way out. The day it finally broke felt ordinary on purpose, a quiet Saturday that pretended nothing was about to happen, and I washed the Harley myself, slow and deliberate, letting soap slide over the chrome while the sun climbed, taking my time like I was grounding myself in the moment, like I was reminding myself that this thing was real and mine and still untouched by the resentment circling it. And when I left it outside to dry it was exactly where it always sat, visible from half the street, not hidden, not provocative, just existing, and I went inside, showered, made coffee, wasted time, only to step back out and feel that sharp wrongness in my chest before my brain caught up, the empty space where the bike should have been staring back at me like a missing tooth, and at first I didn't panic, I walked the block, checked corners, told myself it had been towed for some fabricated violation, but neighbors wouldn't meet my eyes, and eventually one muttered that he'd seen Billy earlier. Helmet in hand, lingering too long, another said they'd heard an engine tear off fast and sloppy, nothing like how I rode, and something cold settled in me then, because I knew, and instead of calling the police I went inside and pulled up my cameras, watching frame by frame as Billy approached with the confidence of someone who thought consequences were optional, glancing around, crouching, pulling wires like he'd done it before. nearly dropping the bike when it roared to life, laughing like it was a game, and then ripping down the street on power he didn't understand or respect, and I walked straight to Karen's house after that, no hesitation, no shouting, just certainty, and she answered already defensive, already angry, and when I told her son stole my bike she exploded, called me a liar, said Billy was misunderstood, said boys test limits, said I was cruel for denying him joy, and while she was still talking her phone rang, and the color drained from her face as she listened, and suddenly the words motorcycle, crash, and hospital changed everything, and we drove separately, arriving to flashing lights and twisted metal, the Harley unrecognizable, torn apart like it had been punished, Billy on a stretcher barely conscious while medics moved fast around him, Karen screaming his name, and me standing there frozen, staring at the exact moment where entitlement met horsepower and lost. Billy didn't make it through the night, and by morning the street felt heavier, like sound itself was afraid to travel, whispers replacing the usual noise, doors opening only halfway, grief moving faster than truth ever does, and by noon Karen had decided that sorrow needed direction, that pain needed a target, and she chose me without hesitation, telling anyone who would listen that I tempted her son, that owning the bike near him was provocation, that responsibility follows possession whether the law agrees or not, and she moved quickly, filing a lawsuit before funeral arrangements were even settled, waving HOA notices like holy text, calling them proof that I was reckless, dangerous, immoral, but court doesn't run on volume, it runs on facts, and facts have a way of standing still while lies trip over themselves, because when the footage played and her voice came out of recordings she swore didn't exist, when the forged notices were examined and dates didn't line up, when neighbors finally spoke after realizing fear no longer protected them, her story started collapsing in real time, sentence by sentence, interruption by interruption, and then Billy's history surfaced quietly, unpaid fines, prior thefts, reckless behavior that painted a pattern no one wanted to admit while he was alive, and none of it erased the tragedy. But tragedy doesn't rewrite consent, doesn't undo ownership, doesn't turn theft into destiny, and the judge listened patiently as Karen unraveled, contradicting herself, blaming neighbors who weren't present, blaming rules she couldn't produce, blaming me for choices she couldn't control, and when the ruling came it was clean and unemotional, her case dismissed, her authority stripped, her HOA power dissolved like it had never existed, civil penalties ordered, damages she couldn't escape, and the neighborhood finally exhaled, not in celebration but in relief, because intimidation only survives in silence, and the court took hers away, and I didn't cheer, didn't feel victory, I sold what was left of the bike and kept what mattered instead, the quiet, the peace, the understanding that this wasn't revenge or justice dressed up as morality, it was consequence arriving on schedule, indifferent to excuses, unchanged by grief, and some nights I still hear that engine in my head, that first calm ride before envy twisted into obsession, and I remind myself that I didn't make the choice Billy made, that grief doesn't grant ownership of blame, and that responsibility doesn't move just because someone demands it to. After everything settled, after the courtrooms emptied and the whispers found new things to feed on, life didn't snap back the way people expect it to, it stretched slowly, unevenly, like a muscle relearning how to move, and the neighborhood changed in ways that weren't announced or voted on. Karen stopped appearing on porches and at meetings, her house dimmed more often than not, her presence reduced to something people noticed only by its absence, while neighbors who once avoided eye contact now nodded, spoke, shared small truths about how afraid they'd been and how long they'd let it go on, and I realized then how power like hers survives, not because it's strong, but because it's loud, because it convinces people that peace is cheaper than resistance, and without her voice filling the air, the street felt different, lighter, not happy, just honest, and I carried my own quiet weight through it, the knowledge that a young man was dead, that a mother would never stop grieving, and that none of that rewrote what actually happened, because accountability isn't cruel, it's necessary, and blame doesn't heal when it's misplaced, it only rots, and on some nights when the world goes still I think back to that auction, that single raised paddle, that harmless moment that set everything in motion, and I understand how ordinary choices can ripple into extraordinary damage without becoming crimes themselves, and I've learned to live with that understanding without letting it hollow me out, because regret and responsibility are not the same thing, and carrying the wrong one only poisons you, so I keep moving forward, quieter now, more observant, aware of how quickly entitlement can disguise itself as victimhood, how easily grief can turn into accusation, and how truth doesn't need to shout to win, it just needs time, and when people ask me how I can live with it all, I don't give them speeches or defenses, I just tell them the same thing every time, that this story didn't end with revenge or justice or triumph, it ended with reality, and reality doesn't care who hurts the most, it only cares about what actually happened. I don't tell this story because I'm proud of it, and I don't tell it because I want sympathy, I tell it because silence is where lies get comfortable, and I've seen what happens when fear keeps people quiet for too long, because none of this was about a motorcycle in the end, it was about entitlement mistaken for rights, about authority mistaken for truth, about a line crossed and the refusal to admit it. And I carry the memory without decorating it, without softening the edges, because pretending it was simpler would be another kind of lie, and I still hear that engine sometimes, not as temptation or loss, but as a reminder of how fast choices become consequences, how quickly moments harden into facts, and I know now that accountability doesn't arrive with drama or closure, it arrives quietly, leaves permanence behind, and moves on, and whether anyone believes me or not no longer matters, because I know what I didn't do, I know what I refused to become, and I know that grief doesn't grant ownership over blame, so this story ends the only way it can, not with forgiveness or punishment, but with truth standing still long after everyone else has finished shouting.